Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon session. We have 4 lightning talks on different initiatives around teaching practice, and we will kick off with Frances Docherty and Cosma Gottardi, who have done great work with second-year chemistry students, and their talk is called Interactive Teaching Units, Applying Lecture Content to Real-World Problems Through Active Learning. So you're welcome to share your slides now, Frances.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frances Docherty and I work with Cosma Gottardi in chemistry, and we're here to tell you today about some interactive teaching units that we have developed this year. So ITUs are given to our second year students to do one in semester 1 and one in semester 2. And the aim is to apply some of the chemistry that they have learned in their course to real world problems, particularly in an industrial context. And we also start to try to develop their transferable skills with these activities. So the general format is that we have 12 students in a group with one staff facilitator. It's a 3-hour session, and the students are given a problem to solve, an industrial chemistry problem, and at the start the students meet as a whole group with the tutor. They're then split into 3 subgroups, and each subgroup is given a different aspect of the problem to look at. So they might be looking at different technologies, or they might be taking different roles. For example, in one group we had, one subgroup was the government body, one was the industrialist, one was environmentalist. They all had different viewpoints. And they go into their subgroups, they digest the material, they answer some questions, and then they all come back as one group and they present to each other about what they have learned and their different viewpoints. They're then drip fed more information, split into their groups again to digest and come back to meet and share. And this goes on all afternoon. And at the end of the afternoon, they try to reach a common consensus about the best approach to take based on all the different viewpoints. So we quite like these sessions, but a couple of years ago, we asked the students how they best learn chemistry and how they best develop graduate attributes. We asked them to rate lectures, labs, tutorials and ITUs, and we got quite negative feedback for the ITUs compared to the other activities. The students didn't think they were relevant to their course. They were uncomfortable working as part of a group. They would rather be independent learners. And they also were unsure about the assessment, which was writing a scientific essay and carrying out a literature search. They hadn't done this before and they were unsure about these skills. So I'm going to pass over to Cosma now to tell you about the improvements we made. Are you there, Cosma? So we seem to be having a little bit of trouble with Cosma, so I'll just continue just now. So we made a number of modifications. We tried to introduce graduate attributes, we tried to make them more relevant, and we introduced some pre and post ITU videos. So I'm just going to talk through these just now. So the first change we made was we created a new topic for the ITUs. We ran one on carbon capture, and we ran it the week before COP26, so it was very topical. And we tried to signpost how the chemistry and the carbon capture related to the lecture courses. Another challenge we had was that these were normally held face-to-face, but because of the pandemic, we had to go online. So we changed to using OneNote. And one of the good things about using this is we could create a common document for the whole group, and each subgroup had their own reading to do, and then they had their own questions to answer. And they were all able to create a common resource by typing on the same document, and that meant at the end of the session, everybody had a complete set of notes to take away and use for the assessment. So another change that we introduced was for the students to get to know how to use OneNote. We introduced a pre-ITU task, and that was to introduce them to graduate attributes. So I looked at a paper by Kondo and Fair, which listed 12 graduate attributes which were desirable to employers. I placed them in alphabetical order, and I asked the students to rate these skills according to how important they thought they would be to employers. And this is the results of the pre-ITU quiz. Along the bottom here on the x-axis, we have the skills rated as valued by employers. So on the left, we can see that interpersonal skills were most valued by employers, leadership was least valued. And then the blue bars show how the students rated them. So you can see that analytical and quantitative skills were most highly valued by the students. And that came 6th in the valuation by employers. So we pointed out to the students this discrepancy, and we highlighted that things like interpersonal skills and teamwork were the most valued by the employers, and that was part of the incentive to do these ITUs, was to develop these skills. Another change we made was we created a post-ITU video. And the post-ITU video interviewed some of the PhD students in our school. So this meant that the students were getting exposure to some of the research that was happening within the school. And we had 2 videos from 2 PhD students about carbon capture. So it was directly relevant to the content of the ITU and helped to connect to the curriculum. And in the post-ITU video, we also had a video of Cosma carrying out a literature search. So the students, as their task, had to write a research paper, and they had to do a literature search as part of this. So Cosma recorded himself in Zoom doing a literature review, and he talked about how to use Google Scholar, how to filter out the results, the different types of papers that might be generated and which ones would be appropriate for this study. And students thought this was really, really useful. So we only have initial feedback at the moment. It's very positive. Staff and students thought it was a good session. And at the moment, our next step is to analyse. We've collected some data from the students. We want to analyse that and compare it to the data from 2 years ago before we made all these changes. We're also developing another new ITU for next year, which is going to be based on antivirals and drug discovery. So that's very topical at the moment. And we're also looking at maybe changing the assessment. So at the moment it's essay-based, but we're looking at some other alternative assessment methods. So if you have any questions, then please get in touch with either myself or Cosma, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Frances, and you have handled it really well. I don't know what happened to Cosma.
I don't know where Cosma's gone, but
thank you so much. What a wonderful initiative. And there are a couple of questions I've got for you here. So I will read them out to you. So I'm not sure you can see them. There's one from William Finlay, who is also upvoted that question, actually. So lots of people are interested in that. So how did you find student participation with OneNote shared documents? And was there ever a reluctance to start, to be the first mover in this regard?
It was actually worked really, really well. We didn't have any problems at all with OneNote. It was a little bit time consuming for us to set up all the files, but once we had done that, the students were very interactive. They seemed happy to type on it and share the resource, and it worked really well. And I would actually use it for other things now. That was the first time I had used it as well, and I would highly recommend it.
Brilliant, thank you. Hi, Cosma, you're back.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, the internet just cut out, and we recently had an engineer in, but anyway, so really sorry about that.
No problem
I hope you enjoyed the talk with Frances.
Yes, it was really interesting.
You can watch the recording, Cosma.
Yeah, there's another question by Anna McGregor who asked. It's a bit of a delay, I think, in the connection. So can you say a little bit more about alternative assessments you're considering?
Yes, so essay skills was one of the skills we wanted to develop, but we're also looking at maybe asking the students to do a poster presentation or a talk based on their point of view, and to maybe try and persuade others through that. We might also like to introduce some peer review if we do a poster or a group presentation, just to make sure that all the students are involved in it. So that would be quite a new thing for us to do. We don't do much of that in chemistry, but we were actually talking about that yesterday. But if anyone has ideas for alternative assessments, we'd be really interested to hear them.
Brilliant, thank you. There's also an anonymous question, and so they're asking, do you think that doing this online is better than traditional face-to-face?
we do miss the face-to-face element of it. I think it is a good opportunity
Yeah.
for the students to connect and get to know each other. So I think for next year, we're planning that we would stay using OneNote, but we might use a computer cluster instead. So that way they could be typing on the screens, but they could be gathering around the same machine and talking to each other face-to-face. I think that would be a happy medium. I don't see us ever going back to the days of doing it with reams and reams of paper. So I think we'd want to keep OneNote, but have it in a computer cluster setting.
Yeah, the teal rooms might be something we explore for that. The new technology enhanced active learning rooms in the hub. We just need to figure out a way of sort of not having sound issues with one group leaching into another group if we try and get them all into the same room. But for now, we're going to, I think for next year, we're just going to use some computer clusters so that everybody has access to their technology and we're not relying on everybody bringing in a laptop, because we can't do that because of equal opportunities, access for everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The teal rooms are quite big, so I think if you go to teal rooms, it'll be big groups of maybe like 30 or 40 or 50, and it'll take you from small groups of 12. So we haven't quite worked out how we can do that yet.
Since you thought about the kind of practical implications of having them all in one room and the kind of noise that we're not used to that anymore online, are we, with these kind of overlapping conversations. So there are lots of positive messages in the chat as well, if you want to catch up with them. And Vicky recommends that you have a chat with Kim Davis in the Academic and Digital Development Unit. She's always happy to talk about diversifying assessment methods, so that related to the previous question.
It's a great idea, Vicky. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Maybe you have time. There is actually a chat question from Saida who says, do you find that quieter students whose first language isn't English contribute more online using chat options? So I will let you to answer that in the chat so that we can move on to our next presenters, if that is okay. So thanks very much, Francis and Cosma, and round of applause. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francis.
Hi, Ruth and Elizabeth. Welcome onto the stage. So let me introduce, we are focusing on maths next, and Ruth and Elizabeth will be talking about enhancing cross-disciplinary mathematical skills through collaborative e-assessment initiatives. And I believe we are expecting some students towards the end, which is that Michael, Anna, and Tess will come onto the stage.
Yeah, they'll join us at the end.
Okay, brilliant. So Elizabeth, if you are happy to share your slides, see whether that works, and at that point I will disappear.
How's that looking?
Yep, perfect.
Great, thank you for coming along to our talk. If I could have the first slide, please, Elizabeth, thank you. So some of you might have heard of Numbas, some of you might not. It's an open source specialist maths e-assessment platform. It was created at Newcastle University, but is increasingly being used by institutions both in the UK and across the world. There have been some previous projects here at Glasgow University using Numbas, including in chemistry, a final year chemistry project, creating some resources there. There was an LTDF project in life sciences in the vet school, creating diagnostic tests. And there was also a workshop at a previous learning and teaching conference, introducing people to the platform. There are some other existing uses of Numbas at the university at the moment, including on a geospatial PGT program that Elizabeth runs and we'll tell you a bit more about later. Also an Access Maths course that I teach. I use it as a formative testing platform. But there's a lot more potential that we have seen and others for this platform to be used at the university. I work in math support at Leeds and I see students from across the university studying lots of different subjects, and they often are asking for more practice examples or just practice to reinforce their understanding of particular basic topics that maybe it's more applied in their subject area, but they just want to practice the maths. So there's a lot of potential, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. But seeing all this potential and gathering together people who were interested in using NumBus further at Glasgow University, we created a project team and we applied for some funding. We had some success with the Chancellor's Fund, and also each of the schools and services involved contributed some funds, and we had enough money to recruit 3 undergraduate student project assistants. I'm talking to Newcastle University, who have done many projects like this in the past, creating question banks. They suggested that non-math specialist undergraduate students actually worked really well on these sorts of projects because they had an understanding of how maths would be used in other subjects rather than maybe overthink, having too much maths knowledge, if you like. So you will meet the students in a moment, but if I can have the next slide, you can see here, this is the project team. So on the sort of left and centre, you'll see the 8 members of staff who are involved in the schools and services they represent. And on the far right, you can see the 3 students who we recruited, and they only started just a few weeks ago, but are already joining us today. So these are just some of the potential development interests that different people have for this project. The main purpose really of the project is to create a resource that anyone at the university could use with a bank of questions, maths questions that are most commonly useful to different subject areas. So that's the main aim, but within that, these are some of the more specific development interests of people within the team. And with that, I will hand over to Elizabeth.
Okay, so NumBus is an online assessment system that was originally specifically designed for mathematical subjects, which means it has a lot of capabilities in terms of presenting maths correctly and allowing expressions to be evaluated, etc. It's completely free to use and it's open source, which means in the unlikely situation that Newcastle decides that they no longer want to support it, somebody else can take it up if they want to. It was designed from the beginning for accessibility, and it has possibilities including adaptive marking and diagnostic and explore modes, where you can introduce different questions depending on what the student does originally. It has some possibilities for graphics add-ons, and it's just added support for programming, so Python code. You can, it's got that integrated now. Don't have time to go into it any further, but there's lots of information, including demonstration questions on different sort of possibilities, etc. at the website, so numbers.org.uk. On the right of the screen, we have just a very, very basic example. And one of the things that is nice about Numbers is they provide the translation of what you're typing in. So it's always a challenge with the maths sort of like expressions. Is what you're typing in actually producing what you want? And it translates it for you straight away. Lots of possibilities as to how you set it up. Do you want immediate correct feedback so you can see immediately how it went? Do you want to be able to repeat the question if you got it wrong straight away, etc. But basically, if the questions are set up, creating an exam is really simple. You select the questions you want, put them in your shopping basket, decide on exam settings, like I was describing above, timing, do you want a password, etc. You can then export it and then import the exam package to Moodle and set up the gradebook. It's a SCORM package possibility, and you can set it up so that the results go directly into the Moodle gradebook. You need to think carefully about exactly how you want to integrate it. So there's quite a lot of different possibilities, which will be good in different situations. You can have an additional optional student resource. You can have formative testing. You can have summative testing, which is really low credit, which means that students do assign time to do it, but they're less stressed about it all going wrong and sort of stuff. So it's almost like formative, but has a little bit of credit attached just to make sure the importance is attached to actually doing it. You can have summative testing, which can be review tests, where you have sort of like a sizable amount of credit attached. One of the good things about the randomization, which Numbers can do, is that the numerical answers can be different for each student. which means if you're worried about sort of like cross-copying, etc., especially in an online situation, it does help in terms of going, well, it's not simple to share the answers. And finally, diagnostic testing. It's more challenging to set up and design diagnostic testing, but it does mean that students, instead of being presented with a whole lot of questions, that some of which they may not be able to do, you can effectively put a course through the questions that suits each particular student. Example here of GES PGT mixed experience maths, everything from, I think I've forgotten about sine and cos to I have a maths degree. 10% assessment of a 20 credit module, 10 weekly tests with minimal credit, repeat as many times as you like, 2 review tests with a single timed sitting where most of the credit was. And I evolved that over sort of like 3 years of sort of tweaking to sort of see how it works and with student feedback. And it was actually, it's become really popular part of the course, which when you're dealing with maths first thing on a Monday morning, you don't really expect students to say. We have further experience, some really good experience with Francis with lab reporting in chemistry. But for now, I'll let you get on to our next stage. So, undergraduate project assistants.
Hi there. So I'm Tess, I'm third year chemistry, and myself and Anna and Michael are the undergraduate project assistants for the Moonbas project at Glasgow. So I'll be telling you a little about what we've been doing to date. It's basically been getting used to the platform, which is very easy, it's very user-friendly, and then starting to kind of comb through what seems to be kind of a wealth of resource already on the platform. A lot provided by Newcastle University that set this up. And then you can see here our question pool, so a set of maths topics that we're hoping to kind of gather information for or questions for initially. If we go on to the next slide, you can kind of see the search function, which we've been using to kind of do the combing through of all the questions. You can even see that I've copied a couple of them here. But Michael, I will pass on to him, who's going to tell you about what we hope to do next.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm a secondary economics student. And after we've found lots of questions, put them into banks, a few of them haven't had advice sections, and so there's the opportunity for us to add these advice sections as well as create further questions and to add to these different question pools. And then further after that, we have the opportunity for lecturers and tutors to ask us to create tests from the banks of questions that we have, where they create specific examples for specific subject areas. For example, here this is for finance for future value, and then therefore giving more access to different subject areas. And I'll pass you on to Anna.
So one thing we all agreed on was how we wish we had Numbers when we were transitioning to university ourselves, and also now during our courses as second and third years. It's so useful to have quick access to a huge range of maths questions, whether just as a refresher or to learn a new skill for our courses. And as students, it's also great to not have to wait for a response from lecturers or tutors, but to get instant answers and advice for specific questions as shown in the slides. The randomization feature is particularly useful for repeated practice of questions. We now have some time for you to ask any questions, and thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. And I think people are still typing their questions into the Q&A. So I'm just going to jump in there with my question, if that's okay. So it's quite a big team. And I wondered how you all pulled it off as a partnership project. How did you find working together? I hope that's not an uncomfortable question.
It's a really good question. It's quite difficult, a bit unwieldy when you've got a lot of people. We have actually found quite success meeting at 9 a.m. I think a lot of people avoid meetings at 9 a.m. So we've been able to meet up, initially when we were putting in the bid for the Chancellor's Fund every couple of weeks and discuss what we wanted out of the project. And yeah, I mean, it took a while with HR to get the contracts through for the students. So now we're just sort of getting into moving forward with the project. So I think we'll see is probably the answer. But it's good to have so many different people involved, different expertise. I don't know if anyone else wants to chip in. Are there some more questions?
Does anybody else want to jump in on that one? Or okay, well, I will ask. There are a couple of questions in Q&A now. So one is by Phil, and he's asking, interested to hear if you get analytics from it to see common mistakes, and can that add more support? For example, I teach statistics and psychology and would be interested in using this.
Yeah, so there's two ways of doing it. You can either add it in as a SCORM package, or you can have a Glasgow University server, and we're currently having the Glasgow University server set up. So it should at least be possible to see which questions in a particular test students are getting right or wrong once that's in place. How you then sort of like extract the numbers if you have a huge class and do stuff with it, yeah, we'll have to see. I can see another question that says, are there any concerns over accessibility of numbers? I haven't tried it with a screen reader, but Christian Lawson Perfect has actually designed it for accessibility. So I think it's go for it.
The main developer, Christian, is also the main developer of the accessibility aspects of MathJax. So really, he probably knows more about making accessible maths on a computer than anyone else. And it means that all that flows through into Numbers. So it's really strong on that side.
Okay, that's brilliant. There's a more practical question from Helena, who's asking, how do you get a staff license? Is that fairly easy?
You don't need a staff license because it's completely open source. So you can just go, hey, here it is, go to the website, I can start using it.
So Newcastle University run a site that anyone can join into on, but we're also, as Elizabeth said, trying to get it set up at Glasgow, and IT services are working on that at the moment.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. A round of applause for a really wonderful big team project, and well done for pulling it off, and good luck for the future. So I now welcome onto the stage Donald. Hi, Donald.
Hi, thanks, Julia.
Hi, how are you? So we're making a jump from mathematics to statistics now, and Donald will be talking about how he's tried to decolonize the statistics curriculum and beyond.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm Donald Reid. I am the statistics lead in the School of Life Sciences, and this is kind of an overview of what we've been doing over the last year and kind of future directions. So it's useful to start with definitions about decolonizing the curriculum, and you'll have heard a lot of different definitions today. Kind of look at this from different angles, and I think they're all very helpful. One definition here is to create spaces and resources for a dialogue amongst all members of the university and envision all cultures and knowledge systems in that curriculum with respect to what's being taught. So just to wake you up maybe from your lunch, write in the chat, can you remember what this is? So this pyramid of numbers here, you may know by name, and these numbers in red here. Okay, so while you're writing in the chat, I think it'll be interesting to see what you say. Depending where you're from, you might have a different name. Okay, so there's already someone saying Tartaglia's triangle. I'm guessing you're probably Italian. For most other Europeans, it's Pascal's triangle, Fibonacci series. But it really differs where you're from when you're educated, how you might call this. It appears in maths in a lot, especially the Fibonacci sequence appears in biology. So our life science students know it as well. But it really fascinated me how, in my mind, we had one name for this, and yet in our students' minds, they have different names for it. And so this got me thinking along the critique that's been made by many, including Maria Hussein of National Union of Students. Why is my curriculum white? and to extent why might my curriculum be quite Eurocentric. And this critique rings true across disciplines, especially where white male voices are predominant, and recognizing why this has been the case in the social and historical context of the subject can be really helpful to kind of disentangling it. So what about statistics? If you look up the history of statistics or Google important statisticians, you may get images like this. Apologies, they're also small, but this is just to highlight their overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly European statisticians who come back in these searches. And this is mirrored actually in a lot of the textbooks and reading resources that our students might have access to. A lot of our statistics books, quite understandably, frame it with a bit of history, and they're remarkably consistent about when statistics is thought to have started as a discipline, and quite often use this term modern statistics. And they all give their reasons, their rationale, whether it's 1660 or 1700, in terms of statistical inference. Maybe 1700 was when it started as a discipline in terms of uncertainty, accuracy, and variability. Around that time in terms of probability, maybe a bit later in terms of statistical tests, statistical methods. But right up to modern editions of textbooks, it's pretty consistent around that time. And part of this comes back to the language. So when do we first start seeing words similar to statistics being used, whether it's in New Latin in Italy in 1500 or the German word statistic in 1749 being first recorded, meaning the data you need to run a state, sometimes the information or the numbers you need to organize your army to run your country. And so with our level 4 statistics students, we started looking at examples where maybe principles of statistics or numbers come up before this point, and asked the students what principles of their course are in these examples and what might they like to see. So this is the Mahabharata. This is an Indian epic. It's kind of like Game of Thrones, but better, longer. It's got everything, dynastic struggles, warring between cousins, some supernatural elements as well. And in it, our hero, Nala, is trying to return to his love and is currently in the service of the king. One of the problems he finds himself in is he's just lost all his worldly possessions gambling, and he wants to get some advice from the king. So the king teaches him his numerical knowledge, teaches him how to estimate the number of leaves and fruit on a tree from a single twig. And to demonstrate that Nala's taken on board this knowledge, they both arrive at the same number. So their thinking and calculations being the same. So what do our students take from this? Well, in terms of what concepts we cover in our courses, concepts of extrapolation, the consistency in prediction, so that two people can use the same equation, plug in the same numbers and arrive at the same outcome. Measures of centrality, that one twig or that one branch is a typical measure that we could use. And the idea of sampling, that we don't have time to count the whole tree, so let's just count a branch and extrapolate up. In terms of things our students would like to add or think that maybe haven't been addressed directly in this example are ideas of error or variation. So different, we might want to count more than one twig to get an idea of what variation there is. And we include many more examples touching on different themes across the course, which I'll just run through quickly. One, if a lot of statistics are linear models, so fitting linear equations to explain our data and predict y for a given value of x, are these particularly modern? And the answer is no. 2000 years ago in the 8th chapter of mathematical art, it's all here. Okay, so this is the image here. This is what it roughly translates as, solving these linear equations. Most statistics textbooks call this Gaussian elimination because that's in the European sense when it was documented. The same goes for this idea of statistics being the numbers you need to run a country, to organize the state, to feed your army, to know your tax base. all of these occur in census data significantly before 1750, 1700. And you may be thinking, well, what about actual statistical tests? Well, there's examples of those which have been published in Statistics Journal. One of them is Al-Kindi, who was using frequency analysis to solve encrypted messages. And our students routinely use frequency analysis like chi-square tests, which operate on similar principles to this in their studies. And it's probably the types of tests that most of our students will know. And there's some other examples we use about specific problems about communicating data, whether it's Florence Nightingale in our data visualization, or Maria Agnesi or David Blackwell. They have really good examples of making statistics kind of available to the masses, whether writing in the common tongue or writing in really accessible ways. So what did our students think about all this? I was quite interested because a lot of them didn't really consider how Eurocentric some of our courses can be, especially, well, if statistics is just maths, is that not the universal language? But really how they're taught and how they're talked about in terms of their historical context and even naming rights is very Eurocentric. So they want this to continue to be integrated across all levels of their statistics courses. They want to explore more global data sets, more global problems, and something which we want to work on together is trying to look at traditional statistical knowledge, especially that which might not be documented so well in the written tradition, but maybe in the oral tradition, which might include even a greater diversity of knowledge. And to do something which we've always done, which is critique data sets, which is still a problem exemplified by Knight et al. If you're dealing with biological data, quite often you have ethnicity data. If you're a rare ethnic group, quite often you're grouped together, you're bunched together for simplicity. Okay, analytically that's not good, and ethically that's not right either. So there's still a lot of things with kind of current government data sets which have problems which our students are recognizing. And these are some of the quotes which kind of highlight what I've just talked about. One thing I found quite interesting is students saying, include this in every lecture, integrate it, don't make a single resource which they may not choose to engage with, especially as it gets nearer to exams. Just make it completely part of the course that's always coming back to. A lot of our students, and I would include myself in this, had a poor understanding of this decolonizing the curriculum movement. And I think because of that, there's a large range of opinions on importance and concern, especially starting off. So it's kind of a general theme which comes back on this, that with our students, we need to kind of slowly work towards this all together. Thank you very much for your time. I think I've gone slightly over. Those just the references used in this talk, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Donald. You're perfectly in time.
Oh, okay, great.
Well done. And it's really fantastic to see this initiative. And I love how the students really long for this, for each of your lectures, rather than, having a standalone resource, but sort of integrating it seems to be the way to go. Now, I've got a question here from Dustin, who's asking, what challenges, if any, have you faced when looking into this topic of decolonizing education?
I think it's a very big topic. So knowing that you can't address everything in one go is important. So there have been some other resources which suggest, focus on the historical context. And that's something that I thought I knew from certain textbooks and clearly didn't know when you start investigating it further. So I found that quite interesting and kind of maybe the first thing to focus on.
Sort of baby steps.
Very much so, and
yeah.
Also get the more you hear from students. I'm trying to chat with a lot of our students from international backgrounds to find out more of this. What are we teaching in a particular way and using terminology that isn't immediately accessible to them? So we can use synonyms for what this might be called in other areas. You immediately bring them with you.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
There's issues about accessibility around this as well. And And ideally, if you can bring people with you quicker, it's just going to make it easier. You know, there's more time for learning, more time for discussion. So
yeah, here. So there's also an anonymous question, and are there any plans to decolonize all of START's teaching at U of G and involve students in doing so?
So yes, so through this, I've been finding out, and especially today, chatting with other people, looking at decolonising the curriculum in general, and I think it should be completely university-wide, the network that does that. Also because a lot of our students, their first question we ask them is kind of, how familiar are you with this movement before? And most of them not very much at all. So when we talk about it, they're really interested in it, but maybe it could be maybe promoted a bit more across the university, just to make it more clear that it's part of our learning and teaching strategy and how we might address that.
I'm pretty certain that will happen in the next few years. Now, there are lots of questions coming in now, and there's one from Ruth who has asked, have you also looked at differences in statistical methodology? Could that also be decolonized?
Absolutely. That's another big area in terms of how you collect data. And I mentioned briefly that how a lot of biological data is categorized, and including the most recent health data, which is put out by kind of UK governments, by US governments, for instance. They collect data, for instance, on gender, and so they have very large data sets of maybe 10,000 people, and for the variable gender, they've got 2 options. And so I find it very hard to believe that they asked 10,000 people their gender and it was an open response that they could give. It's clearly not the case. So they're not measuring what they think they are, and how they're collecting it is more likely that they're just being given a binary option on a questionnaire, and that's feeding in. So all this kind of perpetuates kind of problems. So certainly how you collect the data is really important. Yeah,
absolutely. I have one more question here for you, and then I will leave you to chat in the chat a bit more. So, and this one is from William, and who's asking, from this initial work, what changes do you think that we can take in our teaching in numerical fields to deal with a lot of issues that you've identified?
I think it's worth looking at what textbooks and reading resources we give our students, if they are presenting this kind of narrative that statistics was primarily done by kind of Western Europeans in the last 200 years, and that's it, because whatever reading we're giving our students, there's an authority that comes with that. If we're like, this is what you need to read, this will really, really help you. They trust us, and we'll read that and take that on board. So I think that's one thing to consider.
Yeah, remember the power you have over your students. Yeah. Thank you so much, Donald. And if we could get another round of applause for some really great work here. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
And our last talk today comes from Stephen McNair, who has worked on graduate attributes and incorporating them into the psychology curriculum. And his talk is titled, I can't find it, Graduate Attributes Infographics, Embedding Graduate Attributes in the Psychology Curriculum. So on you go, Stephen.
My screen doesn't seem to be sharing just now.
Okay,
I'm not sure why.
It might be, I think Chrome is advisable.
Yeah, I'm using Chrome. Let's try again.
I wonder whether Ron could help.
Yeah, so when you press the share button down the bottom, and then does it open a bigger screen, like a white window?
Yeah, and I can see Microsoft PowerPoint when I go into Window, but it's totally blanked out. What I'll do is I'll just share the whole screen rather than the window and see if that helps.
I also had to put it in SlideShare before for it to work. I don't know whether that's something.
Hi there. Are you using a Mac?
Yeah.
Have you given it permissions to share the screen?
I did last week when I ran it through with Caitlin.
You may have to redo that.
Okay. Can anyone remember off the top of their head how to give it the permissions?
Sorry, I'm a Windows user myself.
Yeah, me too. But maybe somebody in the audience? Vicky says it's in preferences and then security settings. What's a question, actually?
Okay. Okay, I'm just going to try that again.
Okay.
Okay.
Yay.
I think that's us.
Okay, good luck.
Brilliant. Okay. So, hi folks, my name is Stephen. I'm an LTS lecturer in the School of Psychology and Neuroscience. And what I'm going to be talking about is an area of practice where we've developed some graduate attribute infographics as one example. I'm sharing this as one example of practice in embedding graduate attributes into the psychology curriculum. So, our rationale for developing these infographics, and I promise I will show the infographics eventually. I'm going to talk through the process that we went through in creating them first, and then I'll show you some examples of the infographics. Our rationale for developing these is that professional development is a key aspect of the university's strategy. And at college level, within MVLS, which the School of Psychology and Neuroscience is now part of, one of the main priorities set out in the education strategy, specifically Pillar 3, is that we embed employability into the curricula. Generally speaking, from the student perspective, research has shown that students tend to have a good general awareness of the importance of employability, but not necessarily what goes into building a career. So the steps and practices that they need to put in place to develop their employability, particularly at the early stages in undergraduate programs. Within the School of Psychology and Neuroscience, we wanted to review how we were embedding graduate attributes within our undergraduate program and also our postgraduate taught conversion course programs, of which there are 2 conversion courses. Because a lot of work happens within individual courses, and we wanted to collate all of the practices that were happening across the school into a single resource. In terms of student-facing resources, we recognised a need for a one-stop resource that signposts students towards graduate attribute development and spells out everything that they need in terms of understanding where they're developing their graduate attributes and how in their program. So to do this, we created a series of infographics, for our undergraduate students and a separate series for our conversion students, which link graduate attributes to specific aspects of their courses, some activities and assessments within their courses, to show them where and how they're developing these things, and linking those graduate attributes to key graduate careers so that they can see the long-term value in terms of their career planning. And we did this in terms of careers for both psychology careers, because a lot of our students do want to pursue careers as either a practitioner or researcher in psychology. But we also have a lot of students who want to take their psychology degree and go into related fields. So we cater for both for both pathways. Our approach in developing the infographics, we followed the embedding employability framework set out by the advanced HE, and there's a document by Tibby and Norton which goes into a lot of detail about the various aspects. But the ones that are relevant to what we wanted to do, in terms of stage one, we needed to define employability for our students in terms of a subject-specific dimension, a psychology dimension. Now, the graduate attributes matrix provides clear definitions in terms of academic, personal, and transferable dimensions, but we wanted to take a step further and apply those to the field of psychology. So, for example, subject specialism, one of the attributes. The academic dimension explains this attribute in terms of the values, the principles, the methods, and the limitations of the subject. But we wanted to explore what, in relation to these, what is relevant to being a practitioner in psychology or psychology students in general. And this was informed by professional bodies, so the British Psychological Society, in terms of what we do in our as part of our accredited degree programmes, also by other professional bodies like the NHS, Scottish Prison Service for forensic psychology, local authorities in terms of educational psychology. We then wanted to consider our own practices, our own employability model within the school, which forms stage 2 of the framework. We wanted to look at what are we doing as a school across programmes, across levels within the undergraduate programme. What are we doing to develop students' employability? And to do this, we mapped out the various activities, assignments that our students engage in, and looked at how these align with the 12 graduate attributes. And then lastly, we wanted to link what our psychology students are doing as part of their programs onto what employers are looking for and make those links clear for students. So we mapped the graduate attributes that students are developing onto job specifications for key psychology graduate destinations. And we looked at key employers like the NHS, the prison service, local authorities, and also general employment websites like Prospects and Target Jobs. One of the biggest tasks involved in creating the infographics was mapping the curriculum. So what we had to do was go through every level of the graduate programme and every course of our PGT conversion course and look at what are we asking students to do in every aspect of the course in labs, which you can see makes up the bulk of the mapping for level 1, in labs, in lectures, and in their assignments. So for example, in Psychology 1A Lab 1, we ask students to do various data tasks, homework tasks, they attend lectures, they have various readings to do, some group work to do, and we looked at all of those activities and pigeonholed them in terms of the graduate attributes that they relate to the most. We did the same for assessments, essays, MCQs, reports, and exams, and again looked at which attributes are most relevant to those assignments. That gives a lot of information, a long list of tasks and lots of attributes to talk about. So to make these more digestible to students, we divided them into 3 key themes. We have what we called problem solving graduate attributes, so subject specialist, investigative, and independent and critical thinkers. To have what we call, we have the social attributes, as we call them: the effective communicator, confident, ethically and socially aware, and experienced collaborators. And then what we call the self-management attributes, being adaptable, reflective learners, and being resourceful and responsible. And we use those themes to develop infographics, and here we've got the infographics. We developed 3 infographics around those themes. So here we've got the undergraduate infographics, and we developed the same for our postgraduate students, which I won't show because they're fairly similar in format. For each infographic, we state what kind of attribute what theme we're looking at in terms of the attributes. We then take each attribute in turn and explain a definition of that attribute in terms of the psychological dimension, and then also the areas within their program that they develop that attribute. So things like lectures, labs, opportunities for development. And then lastly, at the bottom, we have how can we develop attributes further. We know our students are going to have to get a lot more experience if they do want to be practitioners in psychology over and above their degree. So we give some additional resources, additional places that they might want to go to develop those attributes further. If we zoom in on what the first attribute infographic, if we look at subject specialist, that means gaining a breadth and depth of knowledge in terms of theories, experimental design, ethics and statistics, and students will develop this through lecture and lab content, writing their assignments, practical skills in the lab, and then some of the more larger projects at levels 3 and 4. We then also had 2 separate infographics that maps the graduate attributes onto specific career paths. So here's a zoom in of one of them, the first one, just to give you an idea. We took for psychology careers and non-psychology careers, we list some various aspects of job specifications taken from prospects, from target jobs, and from job specifications from key employers, and mapped those specification items onto not the graduate attributes themselves, because that would have made for a very lengthy infographic, but onto the graduate attribute themes that we developed. How we use these infographics, we use them within our professional skills course, which is an optional course for our level 3 students and some of our conversion course students, as part of a graduate attribute reflection activity where students choose a graduate attribute, explain how they will develop it by developing a SMART goal, and then reflect on their development after having been through a development process. We use them as posters in our lab spaces, and you can see that from the Twitter post on the right-hand side, just so that students can get an idea of developing awareness just through exposure when we are eventually back in our lab spaces. Before COVID, we did get some positive feedback from students. This came through the SRC as an area of good practice in terms of employability awareness, which was nice to have. We make them available on Moodle for reference for students and staff to help with continuous reflection across the degree programme, but also to help students when they come to key points in the degree, like creating job applications, and it can help them to identify key skills and experiences to talk about. Advisors of study, from a staff perspective, advisors of studies have found these infographics quite useful when having their conversations with their advisees. We do also make these infographics available publicly via the Open Science Framework, and I've given you a link on the slides, and I'm happy to share that in the chat box afterwards, so that you can have a look at them in more detail. And then moving forwards, what we're wanting to do next with these infographics is close the loop. We're looking to assess the impact of the infographics, which is the final stage of the embedding employability framework. We're then looking to expand the infographics to also include our online distance learning students. We have a cohort of conversion students who are studying an online distance learning degree. So we want to make sure that our infographics are representative of those students. And we have set out some of our planned work in poster 6 earlier today. Within the school, we're looking to establish an employability subcommittee so that we can continue to draw areas of good practice together across levels, across programs. And as part of that, create a psychology employability guide for students, which the infographics will become part of. And generally across the university, I feel like there is a discussion to be had about in terms of sharing practice across schools. And what I would like to know is there a place for a wider employability network if we don't already have one? So thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. And there's lots of appreciation being shown right now by clapping hands. It's great to see that you have incorporated them also in your courses, so that it's not like outside of your courses, but actually part of your professional skills courses. So there's a question in the chat. We're a bit over time, but I think one question we can definitely answer. And this is anonymous. And the question is, did you involve any students in your project? Maybe you can talk, even if not, about the engagement of students with those infographics.
So at this stage, because it's been very much mapping and then just disseminating what we've found from the school perspective, we haven't yet involved students in the creation of the infographics, but it's something that we'll be looking at doing as part of the stage 4 when we're assessing the impact, is to see is there anything that's not captured by the infographics that students would like to see represented, so that we can then start to shape the infographics more. We know that part of the development work that's required with these infographics is revisiting them every year, making sure that they're up to date, and capturing the student perspective on it is something that we're looking to do moving forwards.
Brilliant. And how have students engaged with it already? Did you get some informal feedback already?
So part of the informal feedback we've had, as I say, we've had students identify the posters that we made and put up in the labs pre-COVID. Students have identified that as an area of good practice, and it has increased their awareness of their graduate attributes from an earlier stage, which was fantastic to have. We see students using the attributes within the professional skills course. It's clear when students are engaging with those, because we see that reflected in the experiences that they talk about. They include the reflections as part of a professional skills portfolio, so we can tell based on the experiences that students are talking about whether or not the infographics have fed into their process.
That's brilliant, Stephen. Thank you so much. So if we could just get one more round of applause for a really fantastic project, and then I will let you get a very quick coffee and go to the next session in 5 minutes time. Thanks everyone for your questions and contributions. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks.
Bye.
I don't know how to stop sharing my screen.